I do have one comment about Miriam's speech, and that is that she had gratuitous use of dialogue in her speech and really just delivered a mini masterclass on, I think, what I'm about to discuss. So thank you very much, Miriam, for setting me up. I love it. Very beautiful. Okay. I am going to, I've got a few notes that I'm going to go through, just give you a little bit of a breakdown, sort of by way of introduction. There's a few things that I want to talk about with regards to dialogue and dialogue in a speech. We've already had a bit of a sample of it. Just want to sort of touch on sort of the whys, the hows, these sorts of things. I will, at the end of this session, this little discussion about dialogue, I'm going to leave everybody a couple links, and I'll explain those at the end. They're, I don't want you to think of them as homework, but they are resources that you can take away after we have our little mini ed session here, I think, as Renee likes to refer to. So first of all, dialogue in a speech. Why? What sort of types are there, and how do we go about delivering on that? So first of all, why dialogue? Well, like everything in your speech, dialogue is for your audience. It's about bringing your audience more engaged with your speech. And when you introduce dialogue into a speech, you automatically become more conversational, because dialogue isn't that straight, perfectly, synced sentences that we often deliver in a very practiced speech. It's a conversation. So you get that sort of conversational style, which obviously can lend to a little greater engagement. And it's for your audience. You want your audience engaged. By the way, I'm not going to attempt to cover the topic of dialogue in entirety. I'm just going to hit a couple high points. So again, really, the why behind it, as all things, it's for your audience. Bring a little more engagement. The other element, which Miriam demonstrated beautifully, was how it can bring stories to life. I think we all know that in our speeches, having a story in our speech is a very, very powerful element. And dialogue within a story brings that story to life, injects some energy. So that's a couple of reasons why I would think you would want to put some dialogue in, engagement, and bring your stories to life. I'm not saying there aren't other reasons, but those are two to highlight. Types of dialogue. With apologies to people here who haven't seen Anita's speech that she was practicing for the contest season. One thing that Anita did in her speech was a lot of sort of individual dialogue, sort of almost like monologue, personal dialogue. There wasn't really a second character. That is one type, and a very, very powerful type. I'm not saying think of it as a soliloquy, but it is you, to your audience, really projecting, what is coming, on your mind in a dialogue type fashion. It can be a very effective tool. And then the second type, obviously, is what Miriam demonstrated, which is really a dialogue between characters. And that's where you can start to have a crazy amount of fun, like putting a headband on to represent, that you're speaking as a child at that point. So really the two types, one inner monologue as a delivery, and then really the dialogue between characters. I think that makes sense. Hopefully it does. There shouldn't be a lot of controversy there, I think. Now, a little bit about how, again, just sort of coming back to some of Miriam's examples and some of the feedback that we had. One of the things we want to do when we're delivering dialogue in a speech is make it obvious for your audience. Really important, because if you don't make it obvious, your audience can get confused. Once you're confused, audience starts to get lost. So this is a really, really important tactical element to using dialogue in your speech. It has to be super clear that there is, in fact, a dialogue occurring. So techniques to do that, Miriam demonstrated two that I thought were very interesting. One, the prop, changing your physical appearance. Second, a change in voice. But another one that I think came up in some of the discussion that I think is really also a valuable tactic when delivering dialogue is really changing your physical relationship with the camera or your audience, right? And that means changing your positioning, quite noticeably. Now, I exaggerated there, don't necessarily have to do that, but let's make it obvious to your audience that you are now in a dialogue. You know, it could just be a matter of turning your head one way, the other way, or if you're talking to a child, you know, maybe the child is, you know, down below on the ground and child is looking up. I mean, there's techniques. The other one, accents. Be prepared to do, you know, terrible accents. There's no problem with that. Drop it in. It doesn't matter if it's a good accent or a bad accent. It's just as long as the audience now knows you are in a dialogue. Fair? Kind of, I'm seeing a couple nods. All right, excellent. Okay, and then I think just the other thing is always look for opportunities in your speeches to replace narrative with dialogue. Like, you know, and that could be anything. I was gonna give a little example, but Sharina's giving me the card here, and Miriam has already shared, I think, a pretty good example, and we're going to see more examples as the next speakers come up. So just as a bit of a conclusion to wrap up, a couple of things. You know, why audience engagement, bring your stories to life, the types of dialogue that we're talking about, your own sort of inner monologue, soliloquy, dialogue between characters. And then main takeaway on the how and the tactics, make it super clear to your audience that there is a dialogue going on, ideally with some physical positioning and changes of voice. Now, with that, I'm going to drop a couple links into the chat for everybody. Don't look at them now. Look at them after the meeting. One is a TED Talk, and one is a link to a comedian. I'm going to warn you, the comedian, it is a not safe for work video. There is some language, but I would highly encourage you to watch both. The TED Talk, the individual, it's a fantastic talk, but also uses dialogue brilliantly in his speech. The comedian, most of the stand-up bit is actually in French. So if you speak French, you'll enjoy it more than those that don't. But it is an absolute masterclass in how to physically use your body to make a clear distinction in dialogue. So I'm going to drop those into the chat in a little while. Next thing I need to do is give everybody instructions to what's going to happen. Yuri, who controls everything in the Zoom world right now, is in a moment or two going to break this entire group up into breakout rooms. We're all going to get invited off into a room, smaller room with 4 or 5 people here. And I think I'm getting ahead of myself. We need a speech before we do the breakout room. Apologies there. We will be hearing from Renee, then we'll do the breakout rooms, but I will drop the instructions into the chat.